When it comes to feeding bees, there will be times of the year, there'll be seasons where you don't need to feed them at all, and there'll be other times when you do. And that's mostly dependent on the weather, the climate in your area, how things are going. In my particular area, it got cooler faster this year, so I needed to start feeding. I've been feeding for about a month now. One of today's goals and objectives as I go into the hives of this yard to inspect is just to see if I need to continue feeding them or if it's okay to go ahead and stop. Right now I've got my fall flowers blooming in my area. They're still collecting those things, but we are getting cooler as the weeks go on. So I want to make sure that my bees have what they need to make it all the way through winter so that they're there in the spring to greet me at the first spring hive inspection. I'm going to take you with me into some of these hives today so that we can contrast and compare, and hopefully we'll see some hives that I need to keep feeding and some that I don't, so that you get an idea of what's going on. So let's start. Okay, we're going to start with a hive that I suspect is doing quite well. And the reason I think it's doing well is because their feeder jar is nearly empty. And I compare that feeder jar level to the other feeder jars on my other hives. And they still have a lot of food left in theirs. So with this one nearly empty, I would assume that this one's got a good population of bees. Oh yeah, that's what you want your hive to look like this time of year. So looking at this one right away, they've got a great population. I feel confident that they're going to go into the winter well and come out of it well. This particular hive really likes to propolize things together. These frames are really stuck. I'm going to take this outside frame out because it'll be the indicator of how full this hive is, because bees always fill from the inside and work their way out. So this outside frame is going to be our indicator, our telltale sign of whether we need to keep feeding these bees or not. If this is full, the hive is full. If it's not full, it means I need to keep feeding. All right, so this outside frame, this is what we've got. They have it about 1/4 of the way full of sugar syrup. This side's completely empty, so I need to keep feeding. That's the only purpose we came into this hive with. So after we find our answer, we need to go ahead and shut them up and reduce the amount of risk that we put the queen at. Okay, here's our next hive we're going to check out. Smoke the entrance. Remove the feeder jar. Popping the hive cover, smoking underneath. Gently remove. Look for my queen. Don't see her. My first impression is good population, busy bees. I'm going to look down and see how much food they've got. And it looks like they actually have quite a bit. I may be able to stop feeding this hive since we still have time in the fall for them to continue foraging for nectar from the fall flowers. I think they'll be set up to do really well. I've removed my follower board, and remember, the outside frame will be our indicator whether we need to stop feeding or continue feeding. All right, come on. Oh, that's a heavy frame. It's good. Oh yeah, that looks amazing. That's virtually all capped on both sides. This is a hive I don't need to feed anymore. They're practically full. I'm sure they've got a little space left in there that they could pack away some stores, but I feel very confident that I will see this hive next spring at the first spring inspection. For all practical purposes, I shouldn't have to check on this hive again until spring. I'm going to put their feed back, let them continue to take what they can, what they want. And ideally, since I run so many hives, I should mark this one somehow so that it will tell me next time I come around to feed the other hives that this one doesn't need any more. Okay, the way I'm going to do it is I use these tiles to cover the feeder hole when these jars are not on to keep the rain out. I'm just going to set it right there. It's an easy indicator. I'll come back and be like, oh yeah, I put a tile here. They're done. I don't need to feed them anymore. Let's talk about feeding your bees for a second. What do you feed them and when? How do you know? So let's start with what you feed them. There are basically three options. And in my personal opinion, one of them is not actually an option, and I'm going to tell you why. First option of feeding your bees, you can feed them back honey if you have previously harvested from them. You can actually feed their honey back to them. That's probably the safest and healthiest method. And the way you do that is whatever container that you choose to use as a feeder, I would fill it halfway with their honey and the other half with hot tap water and mix it and stir it up really well. You want it diluted. And they'll pack that away the way bees do, and you'll watch as the levels of that feed drop. You'll know when to feed them again. The second method is the one that I use now, and that's sugar syrup. I, in the fall, use a 2-to-1 ratio. Remember, that's 2 pounds of sugar to 1 pound of water, hot tap water, and I mix that either by stirring or boxing back and forth between 2 5-gallon buckets. I'll show you guys how to do that in another video. But the reason I use hot tap water instead of boiling the water and dissolving the sugar that way is because when you boil the water to create a sugar syrup in that manner, you create a toxin. And bees already have enough problems without giving them more. So you only need that sugar to dissolve, and hot tap water is plenty hot enough to do so. So that's the method I use. The third option, which I remember I said it's not really an option to me anymore, is one that I learned in the commercial beekeeping industry when we were feeding hundreds and hundreds of hives, and that's high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup has pesticides in it. It has been okayed by the USDA for human consumption because there's an acceptable level of pesticides in it, according to them. But according to me, there's not an acceptable level of pesticides in it for my bees. They're much smaller. Things are going to affect them much more quickly. And if there's a better alternative like sugar syrup, I'm going to use it. So high fructose corn syrup is used in the commercial industry because it is a cheap food. It's a cheap thing to be able to use, and that's why beekeepers do it. To me, it's not worth the cheapness. It's not worth going that route. I would rather quality over quantity any day. So I use the lesser of two evils, so to speak, and that's sugar syrup. I don't use honey unless something's happened to it and it got dirt in it, and it's not suitable for human consumption. The bees can work all that kind of stuff out of it. So in that case, I will use honey. Like if I spilled some on the floor in the bottling process, it happens. But it's no biggie. The bees can reuse that and recycle it, and there's no waste. One of the big things to remember when feeding your bees to know whether they've had enough is to look at that outside frame. And remember, there's 2 outside frames on either side of the box. Check one of them. If it's partly empty, you know that you can continue feeding your bees. If it's packed full and capped off, you know it's time to stop. One of the biggest crucial things you want to make sure that you do, though, in the fall, is take out any frames that have not been drawn out. Whether you used no foundation method, plastic foundation, or a wax foundation. If the bees have not drawn those out, remove those frames and replace them with ones that they have drawn out. You do not want to go into winter with empty dead space. That's just stuff that the bees, extra material that the bees have to keep warm. And they really don't need to expend more energy than necessary to stay warm, because the more energy they expend, they're going to have to replace that. And the way they do it is by eating their winter stores. And you don't want them to deplete those too soon. Ideally, those winter stores will make it all through winter, and they'll still have some at the first spring hive inspection in an ideal situation. In other videos, I'm going to cover things like how I mix my sugar syrup, the method I've chosen to feed my bees, and we're also going to look at other methods of how to feed bees and the pros and cons of each, so that you can choose the one that's right for you and convenient for you and that works best for the bees. As always, thank you for watching. My newbies, my apprentices, don't forget to drop me one of these. Check the description and the links below for the tools and equipment and gear that I use. And don't forget to subscribe.